This story takes us to a small, somewhat unknown town named Kičevo in Macedonia. It's 2004, and the community of 27,000 people is about to become the center of a story that, until then, would have seemed only imaginable in a piece of dark fiction. But unfortunately, this was truth. So, to be specific, the story begins on November the 16th, 2004. As 41-year-old Kanarika Sijanoska enters the Kičevo police station. And the reason she's at the police station is because she wants to report her mother, Mitra, as a missing person. So Mitra was a retired janitor, and she just left home to go to the local market, a usual run to the store kind of errand thing. But this time she didn't come home, and that was not normal. So a search of Mitra's home showed nothing out of the ordinary, and there was no signs of a break-in. But there was also no signs that Mitra had come home from that run to the market. So it seemed a bit strange. But several days passed, and still there was no sign of Mitra. And you can imagine how anxious and stressed her daughter had become at this stage. And Kanarika, she began to feel that the police weren't taking her mother's case seriously at all. Her mother had disappeared, and the police were being very, very casual about it. And she pressed them to look harder into this case. And the police requested that she pays them to work on this case. Now, probably because they were under the impression that this was a waste of their time. Maybe they felt that Mitra had just gone and left and gone to visit family members or something. But Kanarika knew that her mother wouldn't do that, so Kanarika was panicking, and she was getting no support from the police, so she needed to come up with another plan of action. Because she knew her mother wouldn't just wander off like that. So Kanarika decided to walk down the road on in her housing estate, and knock into the door of a neighbour. Now, this wasn't just any neighbour. This neighbour's name was Vlado Teneski. And Vlado Teneski was a local journalist, but he was an award-winning journalist, and he was a freelance journalist at this stage in his life. But he had a good understanding of the town and its people. So she knocked into Teneski, or Vlado as we'll call him, and she told him what's after happening to her mother. And Vlado would have known Kanarika's mother, Mitra, because Vlado's mother was actually good friends with her. So the daughter, Kanarika, asked Vlado, could you write a story on this? Because my mother's been missing for 3 days now, and the cops are doing nothing about it. And maybe if you could write a story about it, it would expose it, and maybe people would start talking about it and helping me look for her. So, of course, Vlado, being a good neighbour, he obliged, and he said, yeah, of course I'll write the story for you. So the story was written, but unfortunately, it didn't really help find the missing Mitra, and her daughter remained in a state of grievance and confusion about her missing mother for much, much longer. And weeks rolled on, and the only person really digging in and working on this disappearance was Vlado himself, the journalist. He was interviewing neighbours and family members in the hopes of sourcing some sort of leads or information that might help people identify what happened and where Mitra was. It was a fairly noble act, because I'm sure he was getting no pay for this, but I mean, that's what you would do for your neighbours. But sadly, on the 12th of January 2005, 2 whole months after Mitra's disappearance, her body was found. Her naked body was found wrapped in plastic and dumped on the site of a new sports stadium being built just outside of town. Just dumped like rubbish. And the details get a little bit darker here. Mitra's legs had been tied together with telephone cable, and she'd been placed in an upright position. She was covered with old clothes, rubbish, waste materials, and heavy stones. And a forensic examination established that Mitra had been severely beaten, raped, tortured, and then strangled to death. And the medical examiner concluded that Mitra had only been dead for about 10 days, meaning that some sick individual held her captive and had their ways with her for 47 days before she died. That is a seriously twisted individual. Now, things like this didn't happen in small towns like Kičevo, but in recent years there had been a couple of instances of strange, dark, macabre criminal behaviour. In fact, there was a number. In fact, there was a murder in a village very close by only 12 days previous, and police believed that there was a link between both of these cases, as would be natural. On January the 1st, just 12 days before the discovery of Mitra's body, a gruesome murder had also occurred. An elderly man named Radislav Vazanovsky. He was home alone when two men, high on drugs, decided to break into his house with the intent of robbing the man. So these two men, that was Antoy Wityczewski and Igor Mercheski. These two little motherfuckers, for some illogical, unknown reason, likely fueled by Class A crazy drugs, they decided to not just rob this old man Radislav, but for some reason unknown to anybody with a normal human brain, they decided to sexually torture this old man and then kill him. Now, I'd rather not go into detail on the specifics of that situation, but I will leave you with 4 words and your own dark imagination: penetration, objects, fire, and genitals. And I will say no more about that. So Antoy and Igor, they then beat the man to death after they had their fun. And they left his home with a handful of coins in their blood-stained hands as a reward for their fucking crazy, terrible, sadistic actions. What kind of drugs were these people taking? But either way, there is no excuse for that. So police looked at the commonalities in these two cases. So both victims were older, both were sexually tortured, they both lived close to each other, and both crimes occurred within a 2-week time frame. So it's easy to see why the police linked these two cases. So Igor and Antoy had confessed to the old man Radislav's murder. So police decided to charge these guys with Mitra's murder also. And the police later stated that after hours of interrogation, both men had confessed to killing Mitra Sijanovska, as well as Radislav. But not too long after that, both men tried to retract their confession to Mitra's murder, not to Radislav's. They still claimed that they did that and they accepted the guilt for that. But they were now saying that they knew nothing of Mitra's murder and that they were actually beaten and forced into confessing to that crime also. And there was zero evidence connecting these two men to the murder of Mitra. And you have to remember that Mitra was held captive somewhere and tortured for 47 days. These two clowns, they would have left some clues or evidence if they had been involved in a crime so elaborate. Their crime was more impulsive. Holding a woman captive for 47 days and doing the most macabre, sadistic things to her, that's another level altogether. So these two guys were telling the police, telling the judge, telling the prosecutors that they are more than happy to admit guilt to the old man's murder and torture, but they knew nothing about this other one. And this trial became massive news in Macedonia. I mean, you have to remember, before this, murder was an unknown thing in Kičevo, and all of a sudden we have two cases in the space of 2 weeks. So that journalist I told you about earlier, Vlado Tinesky, he covered this trial and he wrote about the event with thorough detail, and what I would say with almost with an artistic edge. You could tell that he was like in his element writing about true crime, probably especially considering he was so closely attached to it. It was in his town. So the trial judge, he showed no interest in the men's claims of innocence with regards to Mitra's murder, and he found them guilty on both cases. He sentenced them to life sentences as a result of that. And the locals of Kičevo, could finally sleep more securely, safe in the knowledge that these two predators, these monsters, were put behind bars. And that they did. They did sleep safely and securely, at least for 2 more years. But 2 years later, in early November 2007, the nightmare recommenced. Another elderly woman, another janitor from the same area, vanishes again. 56-year-old Lubika Likoska left home to go to the market and never returned that day. Sounds familiar, right? Her son Duko, he became very concerned and he started to reach out to family and neighbours to see if anybody had seen Lubika or anybody had spoken to her, or anybody knew where she had gone. And he continued like this for 2 days. He searched for his mother for 2 days, but to no avail. And after those 2 days, he contacted the police to beg for help. And it seems Duko didn't have much faith in the police system either, because he also reached out to that neighbour of his, Vlado Tinesky. A wise move, considering Vlado had done his utmost to highlight the missing persons case for Mitra 2 years earlier. It made sense to go contact Vlado and hope that he would again pick up the mantle and try and publicise this. So again, Vlado did in fact agree to write an article, and it got published in the New Macedonian, which was the paper at the time. But again, months rolled on, and again, no sign of Lubika, the second person to go missing. But Vlado continued to report on the incident, continued to keep eyes on it, keep it fresh in the minds of people. But again, sadly, after 3 months after Lubika went missing, her body was discovered by a truck driver on the side of a road. The driver noticed an actual hand sticking out of a rubbish pile near a roadside stop point on the fringes of the town. Lubika was found naked, her body wrapped in plastic with her feet tied together by a phone cord, the same way as Mitra. And similar to Mitra, she had been severely beaten, tortured, and sexually assaulted before dying of strangulation. And the medical examiner, he estimated that she had been murdered just days earlier, meaning that Lubika had been held captive for up to close to 3 months. She was alive somewhere for 3 months before she was murdered. And of course, this murder had the whole of Macedonia on edge at this stage. It became national news. And remember, we have two guys in jail found guilty for the murder of Mitra Sijanoska, our first female victim. And it now seems that their claims of no involvement were completely true. Now, these two motherfuckers still deserve to be behind bars for what they've done to that poor elderly man. But this does beg the question: were the police wrong? And if so, who the hell is doing this? There are way too many similarities in the murders of Mitra and Lubika. It seems obvious that the killer is still on the loose, right? And the justice system had a lot to answer for. So we still have Vlado Teneski. He stuck with this case. And he started to point out these connections we're just discussing. He started to point these out in his articles. And in an article titled "Serial Killer Stalks Kičevo," he highlighted the similarity in profiles between Lubika, Mitra, and another missing woman, Gorica Pavliska, a third missing woman. So Gorica was a 73-year-old janitor who lived alone in the same neighborhood as the other two murdered women, who were also janitors. And she went missing a few years earlier, May 2003. And it was never really followed up on because Gorica, as I said, she was 73 years old. She didn't have any other family in town. So when Gorica went missing, a lot of people just speculated that she'd gone to another town, or she'd wandered somewhere, or she'd passed away. And nobody chased it up because there was no family there for her. But you can see why Vlado Teneski, he put these three cases together. You can see how he connected them. All three were elderly women who worked as janitors and lived in the same neighborhood. So it seems like Kičevo did in fact have a serial killer, one who had been active for almost 4 years at this stage. So Teneski, he wrote articles speculating on the connections and details on these cases. In a February the 6th article for the Morning Herald, he wrote, "Rumours abound while the police are working on this case. The majority of people in Kičevo think that this murder is related to the double homicide from 2004 of Mitra and Radislav." So in the same article, he speculated as to how Lubika, our second female victim, may have been abducted. He wrote, "Could she have been hit by a car, and instead of taking her to the hospital, the driver decided to take advantage of her in the most hideous manner?" So it seems like Vlado Teneski is trying a bit too hard to be creative and speculative with his writing here. It's like Teneski is trying to flex his artistic craft while writing about the murder of locals. Well, police were not so convinced that there was a connection between these murders. Now, I'm no detective, but don't ask me how they don't see the connections because I do, and I know you watching and listening do also. But the police are just chilling on it, man. Until a few months later, May the 7th, 2008, a 65-year-old retired janitor named Zivana Temelkoska disappears. That's that's our third woman to disappear and our fourth woman that is suspected to be in the same victim profile. So the disappearance behind Savannah is really strange and really gruesome. So strap in, my friends. On the day of her disappearance, while she was at home, she received a phone call from a good friend. And this friend urgently passed on a shocking and horrible message to Savannah, which she had just heard over the local radio station. So a radio report had just come out stating that a young man named Zoran had been hit by a car and was badly injured and was in the hospital. Now Zoran is Savannah's son. So the neighbour rang Savannah to tell her, I think your son got hit by a car and he's in the hospital. Can you imagine getting that phone call? So Savannah naturally runs out of the house, straight towards the hospital, hoping to find her son and hoping he's still alive and that he's going to survive this horrible, horrible incident. But here's the weird bit. Zoran wasn't in the hospital. In fact, Zoran wasn't in an accident. In fact, no young man in the town of Kičevo had been hit by a car that day. This was a completely false report. And then Zoran comes home like any other day, except this time he came home to an empty house. Zoran's mother, Savannah, was now nowhere to be found. So he knew something bad was going down. And Zoran goes knocking on the neighbours' doors and he's asking, has anybody seen my mother? And one of the neighbours tells him, hold on, there was a report on the radio that you had gotten hit by a car and you were in hospital and your mother went off to find out what happened and see if you're okay. And once Zoran heard that, he knew something really bad was after happening to his mother. So he went straight to the police. Of course he did. But I mean, off that, who called in this false report and why? Was it like a sadistic tactic used by the Kičevo monster to lure a woman out and expose her, bringing her into his fatal grip? But this time, anyway, back to the police station. The police took this missing persons case serious for a change. Thank fucking God. So they tried to ring Savannah's phone because it wasn't her home. So they figured Savannah must have her mobile phone on her. So they rang. No answer. Ringing, but no answer. So they're searching away. And then they try and ring again the next afternoon. The following afternoon, they're ringing the phone again and the phone answers. The fucking phone answered.
Is there somebody there?
A woman answers the phone, but it's not Savannah. It's just a local woman who's passing the kindergarten and finds the phone ringing in a grass verge. And it appeared that the phone had been thrown out of a moving vehicle because it was just off the side of the road and it was just left there. This was clear, crystal clear evidence that Savannah was in serious danger at this point. And this time it didn't take 3 months. This time it took 9 days. and the crushing news arrived at the door of the Temelkauskas family. Savannah's body was discovered at a dumping ground near the local football stadium. And as usual, it wasn't a pretty scene at all. This time she was wearing a robe, but she wasn't wearing it. It was wrapped around her head, and the rest of her body was naked. And it had been tied and wrapped in the same manner as the other victims. And it gets a bit more grim here, and I'm not going to go into full detail because, one, I don't want to, and two, if you want to find out the full detail, go look. But Savannah was found with 13 stab wounds in her skull, and she also had multiple fractured ribs, and it's suspected that the killer knelt on her chest as he strangled her, causing those ribs to break. And there's more horrid aspects to this. There was also evidence that she had been sexually assaulted, mutilated, and raped. And strange objects were found inside the poor woman. And if you want more details on what I mean by that, go look it up yourself because it's dark. And as I said, Savannah was naked with the exception of a robe wrapped around her head. But that robe, that wasn't her robe. She didn't leave the house in that robe. So that ended up being a piece of evidence. And also, on an evidence perspective, there was a jersey found at the scene, very close to her body, with traces of blood on it. And the police believed that that may have belonged to the killer. And as well as this, there were 7 hairs found on Savannah's body. And evidence showed that Savannah had been murdered within 24 hours of her abduction, which is different than the previous ones. But her death itself was as brutal as it gets. She didn't get it any easier than the previous victims. But police now had zero doubts that they were dealing with a sadistic, calculated serial killer. So our renowned local journalist Vlado Tinesky, he continues to cover the story with the detail that it deserved, keeping eyes on it, keeping it exposed, and hopefully maybe that help get leads or help people maybe remember something. They seen a car here, they seen something. Maybe all these newspaper reports that Vlado was writing would help identify this killer. And it was actually Vlado who named him the Kičevo monster, a phrase that stuck over time. That's what people were calling this man, the Kičevo monster. And from a piece that Tinesky published in a paper called Nova Macedonia on May the 19th, 2008, this is what he wrote. He said, "The people of Kičevo live in fear after another butchered body has been found in the town. The corpse strongly resembles one discovered 20 kilometers outside Kičevo last year. And there is a possibility that these monstrous murders are the work of a serial killer. Both women were tortured and murdered in the same fashion, which rules out the possibility that this could have been done by 2 different people. The massacred body of Savannah Temelkauskas was wrapped in a transparent nylon bag and tied with a telephone cable, which was previously used to murder the poor woman." So, a forensic profile was finally made. The investigators got forensic specialists in to create a profile that would hopefully help narrow down the suspect pool, give them an idea of what they're looking for. So let me give you the profile that they came up as. So first, it was a middle-aged male. Second, most likely local and knew his victims to some extent. Another point was he was strong and above average intelligence. He was a concise planner and well organised. I mean, you had to be. To actually plan a false radio report to lure a woman out to murder her, abduct her, hold her hostage for a long time, torture her, and then murder her. That's as concise and well organised and fucking dark, may I say, as it gets. They also said this individual likely possesses deep-seated sexual frustrations originating from his youth. Fucking right. So in the meantime, don't forget about these two fucking clowns in prison, Antoy and Igor. They had their case re-reviewed for the murder of Mitra Sibjanoska. And during this review, it was discovered that the prosecutor, he had actually done DNA testing on semen found inside of Mitra. And that semen did not match either of these men. But that motherfucker prosecutor, he withheld that information from the defense at the trial. Typical corruption. So he actually knew that that semen didn't belong to them two men, but he withheld it. Now maybe in his mind he was thinking, these motherfuckers killed that poor old man, so I'm saying nothing. I'm not saying that's ethical, but I do understand it, because those two men, they deserve to stay in jail. They were in fact acquitted of the murder of Mitra. Fair enough, justifiable. But they did remain in prison for the sick motherfucking acts they had committed on poor Radislav. But anyway, while this is all going on, we've got the profile happening, yeah? And through the use of this profile, investigators had reduced the pool of suspects down to 150 people. So it's getting closer now, man, you know? So the search started to intensify. And then police managed to identify the blood type found on that jersey that was next to Savannah's body, our last victim. And that helped them narrow down the suspect pool to 15 people. Now shit's getting serious. All these 15 men were brought in, interviewed, and they all agreed to give DNA samples. So cops had the DNA samples then. So we get to June the 20th, 2008. This was a big, big day in the case of the hunt for the Kičevo monster, my friends. Because the DNA test results came back. And those DNA test results came back with a match for the semen found in Savannah Temelkoska's body. Investigators had finally found the Kičevo monster. Can you imagine the feeling? The relief. So that day, 3 p.m, police arrest a 56-year-old local man for the murders of Savannah and Lubika. Yes, yes, yes. The rumours of his arrest, those rumours got to the editor of the new Macedonian paper, and that editor was elated. He immediately ran to the phone. I better contact Vlado Tineski, because Vlado Tineski has been writing so thoroughly about this motherfucking case for the last 4 years that he has to break the story. Yes, sorry, I'm getting excited. It's a big moment. Big moment in that story. I can feel the emotion of finally finding out who this prick is and putting handcuffs on him. And the editor has finally heard that it's happened. And in ringing Vlado Tineski to tell him, get your pen and paper, go down there, find out who it is and write the story, and let's blow Macedonia away. Let's relieve everyone's tension. And the phone is ringing out like ring, 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 just like Savannah's rang that time. And every time there's another dial tone ringing, the stress levels are going up and increasing, and the editor's having a nervous breakdown. He doesn't want to give this story to anyone else, but Vlado's phone is ringing out and he's wondering what the fuck is going on. Vlado's big moment has come and he's not answering the call. He has his opportunity to bring an end to the biggest crime mystery in Macedonian history, at least in recent years. But Vlado cannot answer the phone. Vlado cannot finish the story. because Vlado Tedeschi was the story. Vlado Tedeschi had just been arrested under suspicion of being the Kičevo monster. What the fuck? This sadistic individual was writing about his own crimes, deriving some sort of sick pleasure through telling his own murderous tales with the pen, man. Revisiting the scene of his own crimes cloaked in the mask of journalism. My God. It's honestly, if this story occurred in the UK or the USA or a Western country, English speaking, this would be one of the biggest movies of the decade. This story sings like a piece of brilliantly written fiction, except for it's real. And like this prick, Vlado Tedeschi must have felt invincible. Or more appropriately, he must have felt invisible. But he started to step too close to the edge, my friends. And that's why he got caught. So it seems that the police had actually been watching Vlado Tedeschi for some time. They grew more and more suspicious of him, as his articles continuously seemed to have intimate details on each crime. When he was asked about his sources all the time, Vlado would never name anyone. He'd just say, I was talking to family, or I was talking to police. And it was his writing that made him suspect number one with investigators. For on a couple of occasions, he made a little slip up. Vlado had alluded to the fact that his victims were found with their legs tied together by a phone cord. The same phone cord used to strangle them. That's what he said in one of his newspaper articles. Well, police never released the fact that the victims were strangled with the fucking phone cord. So Vlado had actually hung himself with that phone cord as well. And the police were very confident that nobody had been leaking information out during this investigation. They had it sealed close shut, man. So Vlado Tedeschi either knew the killer or Vlado Tedeschi was the killer. And it turns out that he was both. DNA evidence, it matched Vlado's blood to the semen found on one of the bodies. And also, remember those 7 hairs I had alluded to on Savannah's body? Well, that matched his DNA also. And the forensic profiling, that was likely the final nail in the coffin for Vlado, should I say. Because let's have a look at that forensic profiling once more. So the profile of the murderer again, right, was number 1 was a middle-aged male. Well, Vlado was a 56-year-old male. Most likely local and knew his victims to some extent. Vlado lived on the same street as these victims. And he knew them well. He said he didn't. He knew them. Strong and above average intelligence. Vlado was relatively fit for his age, and he was certainly above average intelligence. Vlado had won 3 awards for his journalistic work. A concise planner and well organised. He was very concise in how he wrote. He was very organised in his work. He was very well renowned for it. And point 5, possessed deep-seated sexual frustrations originating from his youth. Now that we don't know enough about Vlado's past. We can only speculate on that. So we won't go too far into that. But on top of all these similarities with profile, here's some other interesting notes I found. So all 4 of our victims were elderly ladies with a history of being janitors. Alright, this is strange. Well, Vlado's mother, who recently died from a suspected drug overdose, well, she worked as a janitor. Like, what's going on, man? What is up? This is like some Norman Bates shit, you know what I mean? Also, speaking of Norman Bates, remember that robe I was talking about that was wrapped around Savannah, our last victim's head? Well, that's believed to have belonged to Vlado's mother. So, as I said, some Norman Bates shit going on here. And also, remember, two of our victims were alive for weeks after they went missing. Well, Vlado's family had a secluded summer house in the woods, and it's believed that this is where he kept those victims captive and had his sick, sadistic, dark, macabre, sociopathic, crazy ways with. So police searched that summer house, and some shoes and clothing belonging to the victims was found there. And evidence led the police to believe that Vlado used to dress his victims up in his mother's clothes. I don't really know this psychology behind why he would do that. I won't get into that in this episode. I'm not sure what was going on in that man's head. And the funny thing is, well, not funny, but the strange thing is, a lot of his friends and family members just said none of these characteristics you describe are the man we know. He was a quiet, reserved, nice man by all accounts. But who knows what goes on in the mind of some people. And the strange thing is that he had no history of violence or aggression towards women. His ex-wife, she said the only time she ever seen this man being aggressive was when he was around his mother. He got a little bit aggressive, which kind of ties into some of the crazy Norman Bates shit we're talking about. But as I said, his friends or family believed that he was not capable of being the Kičevo monster. It was unfathomable to them, and some of them to this very day still deny the potential that he could have been, and some still fight for it, to be honest. You could look that up. That's another cut off an episode. But what happened when Vlado got arrested? What happened to Vlado Tedeschi? Well, let me fill you in a little bit on that before we go home, because the story does not get any more normal. It stays stranger than a motherfucker. So when he was arrested, he was brought straight to jail and presented with his charges. The charges for 2 murders, because they had enough evidence for that for the moment. But like many poorer countries, many countries these days, the jail was overcrowded. So Vlado should normally be put in a cell on his own. Somebody accused of such crimes should be kept solitary. But the jail's overcrowded. Vlado gets put in a cell with 3 other men. 2 young men who were in jail for suspected election fraud. So not necessarily violent men, right? And one man, was in jail for killing a 14-year-old girl by poisoning her. Now, I don't know the story behind that, but he's a fucked up bastard too. But by all accounts, Vlado was getting on okay. He was actually chatting to his cellmates. He was eating his food. The only thing he refused to do was go out on yard time. And that's most likely out of fear of being attacked by another prisoner, I would imagine. But everything else seemed to be perfectly normal for him. And he was there for 3 days. But on day 3 of Vlado Tedeschi's jail stay, one of his cellmates wakes up in the middle of the night. He wakes up to the sound of running water. And as he approached the bathroom area of the cell, so the cell had a bathroom area with like a sliding door, like those old elevator accordion looking things. Remember them? I remember them from being in hospital when I was a kid in Temple Street. You'd see these big doors. Anyway, sorry. So there was one of them. The door was partially closed, that sliding door. So he opens that and the running water. He's like, what the fuck's going on? Anyway, once he opens that door, he screams for the guards. Fucking guards, come in now. And why? Because Vlado's down on his knees in the bathroom with his head fully immersed in a pail of water. So Vlado Tineski had drowned to death on day 3 of his stay in jail. And the question is, did Vlado Tineski drown himself? Did he actually take his own head, place it deep under a bucket of water, and manage to stay there until he drowned to death? That's pretty tricky. Or had Vlado actually been murdered? There is much speculation behind this, and to this day we don't know, to be honest with you. But when guards they came in and searched the cell, they found a note under Vlado's pillow, and the note said, "I am proud of my family and I love them very much. I have not done any of the things I am accused of. I did not commit these murders." That's what the note said. So we never get to truly find out what happened with the Kičevo monster murders and what was the story with Vlado Tineski, because we never went to court, unfortunately. So that was the story of Vlado Tineski, the Kičevo monster. And there's more layers to that story. I mean, there's plenty of points you could talk about. Let me just pick a couple out of interest. Like, I am still shocked about that false radio report, but I did learn that Vlado Tineski actually had access to get reports published on that radio station because he was a journalist. So did Vlado Tineski actually call in that report so he could attack Savannah? The dark motherfucker, I suspect he did. Also, there was I quoted another paper report for him where he speculated that one of not his victims, he didn't call it his victims, but one of their victims. Remember, he said, could she have been hit by a car, and instead of taking her to hospital, the sadistic murderer placed her in his car and had his way with her? So to me, I think Vlado Tineski's writing his little story there in the paper and laughing because he's actually telling his truth to people and hiding behind it. You know what I mean? He's revisiting the crime and publishing it in the paper. You know, you always hear about murderers revisiting the scene. Well, he got the opportunity to revisit the scene by publishing it in the paper. That must have given him the most ultimate of sick erections. Do you know what I'm saying? But we'll never find out the full story. And was Vlado Tineski killed in his cell? Because Vlado Tineski in the past used to write about political corruption, and his family had been threatened a couple of times in the past over articles he wrote. So did somebody use this as an opportunity to get that motherfucker killed? Some people think Vlado Tineski was framed for the whole thing. I think that's a bit of a long shot myself. I mean, there's a lot of evidence. The profile alone makes me think that was that motherfucker. But who knows? Anyway, that's the story of Vlado Tineski, the Kičevo monster. I thought that was a really interesting one. But if anyone has any points or insights into that, get at me. And I am going to have to let you guys leave. This was episode 30 of the Road Podcast. And I'm smiling here because I didn't know I could do 30 episodes and I'm still enjoying the process. Look, thank you to everyone that tunes in. This one's on YouTube. And if you're watching it, thank you very much. Subscribe. But my main work is on Spotify, my friends. I love audio. I love audio and I'm not pretty enough to be a YouTuber. But thank you, whichever platform you're on. I love yous all. And look, have a good week, my friends. This has been the Road Podcast. Take care of yourselves.